Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be a quick bonus video I'm going to do as we are into NFC Championship week. The game is just a few days away. And as I've been doing some groundwork and some research getting ready for my prediction video, I've come across a few interesting facts that I just like I said, I found them interesting, thought I'd share them with you. They're obviously not going to really play much of a role in my prediction, but they're still interesting. Some of them I already knew, some of them were news to me, but all of it I think is stuff that I found interesting, so I thought maybe you would too. The first is its relation with the Eagles and the Vikings as it relates to the Super Bowl, and specifically the Eagles getting to the Super Bowl. And that is both times the Eagles made the Super Bowl, they had to play the Vikings in the playoffs to get there. Interestingly enough, both prior times it was in the divisional round, but in both instances they had to beat the Vikings during the playoffs to get to the Super Bowl. And in fact, the Eagles have played the Vikings 3 times in the playoffs. The 2 times I mentioned before when we got to the Super Bowl, and the 3rd time was actually more recently, the 2008 season, so the postseason played in 2009. That was the year the Eagles beat the Vikings in the wild card round, and we ended up getting to the NFC Championship game and losing to the Cardinals. So really no correlation in terms of the fact that we're 3-0 all time against the Vikings, because there's really no players that would have been on that team that are on this team, maybe one from each team. But really there's no correlation. But it's an interesting fact. The Eagles are all-time 3-0 against the Vikings in the playoffs. If you are looking for a little synergy as it relates to the Eagles getting to the Super Bowl and this particular playoff run, there is one fact that I did find really interesting, and this was something that I did know, but I heard it put in a very interesting way that I thought was sort of neat, and that is the last time the Eagles got to the Super Bowl, they had to beat the Falcons and Vikings to get there, who were our opponents in this year's playoffs, the Falcons and Vikings. Once we got to that Super Bowl, we had to play the New England Patriots in Jacksonville. And who were the 2 AFC teams that are left? It's the New England Patriots and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it's really a neat sort of synergy that we have with that 2004 season. Really, once again, no correlation, and it really doesn't play anything into what I'm going to say in terms of my prediction for the game. But I think it's a little interesting tidbit and an interesting way that I heard that those facts put together. Another interesting fact that I found about this NFC Championship game is how it relates to Lincoln Financial Field. And I was thinking about it, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that Link opened up in 2003. So we're talking about 15 seasons now that Link has been opened. This is already going to be the 3rd NFC Championship game played at the Link. So it got me thinking, how is that really out of the norm? Is it sort of, usual? Where exactly do we stand as it relates to hosting NFC Championship games? So I looked over these last 15 years to see exactly how many stadiums did get used for conference championship games and at what frequency. And I found an interesting fact, and that is there's only one stadium that's hosted more conference championship games in the last 15 years than Lincoln Financial Field, and that's no surprise, Gillette Stadium for the New England Patriots. Now, there are a couple that have the same amount, specifically CenturyLink Field, where the Seahawks play, have also hosted 3. Heinz Field, I know, has hosted 3. I think Denver's new Mile High Stadium, that name changes so often, I don't remember what it's called right now, but I think it's hosted 3 AFC Championship games. But the only stadium that's hosted more than the Link has been Gillette Stadium. So I found that interesting that the Link is now going to be right there, tied at 2nd for the number of conference championship games hosted in the last 15 years. And if you look a little bit broader, this is actually the 9th playoff game as a whole, wildcard division or championship game, the 9th playoff game as a whole being hosted at Lincoln Financial Field. And if you look at that same 15-year window and say, how are we against other stadiums? Once again, there's only 3 stadiums that are ahead of us. Gillette Stadium's number 1, no surprise there. And then tied at 2 with 11 appearances is CenturyLink Field for the Seahawks and Heinz Field for the Steelers. So those each have 11 playoff games that have been played at their respective locations. But the Link is right there at the top, which tells you that the Eagles, over that 15 years, have been a pretty decent team and have hosted quite a few playoff games during that time. Another interesting fact I found was as it relates to Nick Foles. If the Eagles win this game, Nick Foles will only be the third quarterback to take his team to the Super Bowl after having started 5 or fewer games for his team during that season. The prior 2 guys who did that were Doug Williams in Super Bowl 22 for the Washington Redskins and Jeff Hostetler in Super Bowl 25 to the New York Giants. The interesting thing about that is both those guys won those particular Super Bowls. But we'll get to that if Nick Foles is victorious on Sunday. Another interesting fact I want to talk about that does relate to my prediction video, but I don't really want to take the time to go through all this in a prediction video, so I thought I'd share the facts here. Because I do find the facts interesting, and they don't weigh as heavily on my prediction as maybe some of the other statistics would. But it's how that Vikings game played out at the end. One of the websites I use quite a bit when I'm doing my research is ProFootballReference.com, and it's a website I'd highly recommend if you're looking for statistics. It's a great website. But one of the things they do for every game in their box scores is they have what they call a win probability chart. And I want to go ahead and take a look at the win probability chart for that Vikings-Saints game because what it does is it charts the probability a team has of winning a game as each play happens. So their percentage chance of winning a game after a particular play. And it really just charts exactly how a game flows. And really, I want to take a look at the last 3 minutes of that game and just how crazy of a finish that game was.
And here's the chart that you see. So you see as the line goes up, it means that Minnesota's probability of winning goes way up. And as it goes down, the Saints take over. As you can see, for the most half, Minnesota controlled the game almost the whole way. You know, going in at halftime, they're up 17-0, and they've got a 98% chance of winning the game. I think it goes up as high as, 99.6, I think is the highest it goes up at that point. Then, of course, as the Saints start their comeback, it starts coming back down all the way to the point where the Saints take the lead at 21-20. With 3 minutes left, and then it starts to go back up, and then finally it goes up to where the Vikings are kicking the field goal to take the lead, but it actually drops down when they do because they leave too much time on the clock, so it's 23-21 Vikings, and then as the Saints drive goes and it's not going as well, it's at 23-21, then of course the Saints do make the plays and bring it to the point where they are going to get the field goal. But they leave a little bit of time on the clock. But as you can see, then New Orleans is up 24-23. And then it really starts to go, nuts here in the last few seconds, where it goes all the way down to 0.1% chance that the Vikings are going to lose the game or win the game. So they're down to 0.1%. So that's 1 out of 1,000. That would happen. And then, of course, it shoots all the way up to 100% for the last play of the game when they score the touchdown. So that's sort of the ebb and the flow of the way those last 3 minutes went, which was absolutely crazy for the Vikings and for their emotions.
So you can see just exactly how insane of a finish that particular game was. And it really just goes to show, how a team can have some of those emotional highs. And you can even see it in the players after they were being interviewed after the game. They didn't know what to say. They didn't really believe what had just happened. And sometimes some of those amazing kind of games and amazing kind of endings end up sort of there's an emotional come down from that sometimes makes it difficult the following week. And that really goes for a lot of the historical plays that have happened in the NFL over the course of the years. For instance, one of the big plays that everyone always talks about as it relates to playoff history and the NFL is the Immaculate Reception, where the Steelers beat the Raiders in an absolutely bizarre last play that allowed the Steelers to win the game. And everyone remembers that happened in the 70s, and people say, hey, the Steelers won all those Super Bowls. And I think a lot of people, myself included, because that happened actually in 1972, the year I was born, the Immaculate Reception did. But growing up, when I saw that replay, I just sort of always assumed it happened in a year the Steelers won a Super Bowl, but it didn't. The Steelers actually lost the next week in the AFC Championship game against the Dolphins. Fast forward, we have our own miraculous play that happened. 4th and 26, Donovan McNabb completes the amazing pass to Freddie Mitchell. A lot of people forget the next week the Eagles lose that game to the Carolina Panthers on the way to Super Bowl 38. And this just goes to show how lots of times you have some of those improbable wins and the emotional come down from that. Sometimes it's really difficult for that team to recover for the following week. And that gets to a fact that I saw earlier today that really jumped out at me, and that's the fact that the last 4 playoff games that ended in walk-off touchdowns, the team that ended up winning that game, obviously, and scoring that walk-off touchdown, like the Vikings did this past week against the Saints, ended up losing the following week. The last 4 times that has happened. And when I first saw that, I'm like, okay, well, is that a situation like a wild card team wins and then they go and they're going to be obviously an underdog the next week in the divisional round? Is it that the kind of situation that we've got? And that is in some cases, but not in all 4 cases. Specifically, the most recent case was in the Cardinals in 2015 against the Green Bay Packers. That was in a divisional playoff game like this, like the scenario would be for this week, where they have that miraculous play against the Packers. The next week they go and they lose to the Panthers on the way to Super Bowl 50. The next most recent one is the Seahawks winning in a walk-off touchdown against the Green Bay Packers again. That's in the NFC Championship game. And then, of course, the next game, the Seahawks lose against the Patriots in Super Bowl 49. The next case we have is in 2011. The Broncos, I remember this game specifically, the Broncos beat the Steelers on a crazy Tim Tebow play where he hardly completes any passes all game, but he completes a huge bomb in overtime to beat the Steelers in the wild card round. They then go the next week and lose the divisional round against the Patriots. And the final instance happens in 2009 when the Cardinals in the wild card round end up beating the Packers on a last-second play. Unfortunately, as I'm looking at this, I'm really starting to feel bad for Packers fans. That's 3 times that this has happened against them in these ones that I'm mentioning. So the Cardinals beat them on a last-second play, a last-second touchdown, and then the following week, the Cardinals then in the divisional round go to the divisional round and lose to the Saints, and that was the year the Saints went on and won the Super Bowl. So it has happened a couple times in wild card in the divisional, but you've also seen that it's happened in other instances, which I think does show that there is sometimes a little bit of a letdown that teams experience when this happens and they win an emotional game like that. Sometimes it makes it a lot more difficult the next week to get up for that next game. So like I said, those are some facts I found interesting. I don't know that necessarily that will play a huge role in my prediction, but it is something I'm considering as I'm looking at it. I really haven't decided how I'm going to go on this game yet or not. I'm still looking at a lot of different things, but that is one thing that sort of did catch my attention. I didn't want to take the time to have to go through all of that, though, in the prediction video. So I wanted to sort of spell that out for you now and sort of give you some of those things and some things I'm thinking about as I'm getting ready to do my prediction video. Should be posting the prediction video on Saturday morning and letting you know exactly what I think is going to happen and sort of my breakdown, what I think is going to be important for the Eagles to do to win and whether or not I think they can win. Check below. Let me know what you think and let me know if you think the Eagles are going to win this game. If you want to give me some early predictions, by all means, do that, and we'll see exactly how that matches up with what I end up coming up with for the prediction when I post that later this week. Until later, fly Eagles fly.